Yo, what's up? I'm Trav. I'm the other half of the Sports Bag Bros podcast, and I know why you're here. Let's get straight to it. You want to know what to expect from the Alabama Crimson Tide in the 2023 season. You saw the thumbnail, and I'm going to try to give you in short order what I believe is going to happen with the Tide during this 2023 season. Well, as we already know, Bama was 11-2 last season. Not a bad record, but certainly not Alabama fans' expectations or even Nick Saban's expectations. They didn't even get to the national championship playoff game. They were frozen out. They were just in a regular bowl game for the first time in a long time, as the Georgia Bulldogs ended up repeating and becoming national champions for a second year. But Alabama fans are not happy. They have every reason not to be happy. They are entitled, and in their opinion, they're entitled to championships and nothing more, nothing less. This time around, things may be different. There's been a lot of disrespect going on. First and foremost, the Alabama Crimson Tide going into the 2023 season, according to AP, as the number 4 team in the country. That still puts them within proximity to go to a national championship game, but they want to start off that way. They want to end that way. And that's what's been happening in Alabama for such a long time until now. So what's going to happen? I'm going to give you the goods. Take it for what you think. I think I know what I'm talking about. Bama fans probably think I don't. But let's get to it. Once again, they were 11-2 last season. Yes, not a bad record. They were 6-2 in the SEC. Those 2 losses were close losses, coming to the Tennessee Volunteers and the eventual West champions, LSU. The Tigers, yes, they upset Alabama. Surprise, surprise. But Alabama doesn't like being upset because they believe they belong in championship games, whether SEC or national championship games. They go into 2023 with a lot of questions. They need answers. Here are some of those answers. They were 7-0 at home last season. We know that Tuscaloosa is a hard place to play. So that loss they had against LSU last year in Baton Rouge may not be a thing this year because that game is in Tuscaloosa. That game that was close last season, even though they won in Austin, Texas. That game should have a little bit more separation this year because Texas is coming to Tuscaloosa as well. Once again, it's all about the disrespect card. J.C. Latham, offensive lineman for the Crimson Tide, feels they've been disrespected. Their fans feel the same way because they're just number 4 out of all of these teams in college football. They don't think that they're getting the respect that they've earned over all of these years since Nick Saban has won 6 championships in Tuscaloosa. Who's ahead of them? Georgia, of course, the 2-time defending champions looking to become 3-time champions for the first time since before World War II when the Minnesota Gophers had done the same thing. Well, who's number 2? It's not Alabama. We said they're 4, but it's Michigan. And surprisingly, Michigan may have something to say during the national championship season when it comes about if they take care of their own business in the Big Ten. They're the only team out of the top 4 that brings back their previous year's starting quarterback, who is J.J. McCarthy. So Michigan has a lot of people on their team that they believe they can win with and win a championship with. So when we're talking about Alabama, it may not just be an SEC thing. It's a national thing, and Michigan may be a part of it. And who's number 3? Ohio State. Their quarterback is going to the NFL, and they're still ranked higher than Alabama, whose quarterback, Bryce Young, became the number 1 pick overall in the NFL draft. But don't fret, Alabama fans. You know why? Because Nick Saban has been the Pied Piper for years, and he's always replenished what has been lost, regardless of how many bodies goes into the NFL every year. He brings in other bodies who replaces them, sometimes even more so. And he's always going to be in the thick of a championship. And that's not different this time around either. They're returning 9 starters from that 11-2 team. That team that only lost 2 games in the SEC. 4 starters on offense, 5 starters on defense. We'll see where this is going. Nick Saban's about to go into his bag of tricks and bag of recruits to come up with something else this time around. But when he lost those key players from last season, that's where the problem lies. He always had that stability at quarterback, and that had led to national championships or even opportunities. The days of Jalen Hurts or Tua or Bryce Young, the most recent one. I did not forget about Mac Jones. Mac Jones is also one of those quarterbacks that were on the Alabama Crimson Tide ledger who now litter the NFL with their talent. In addition to losing Bryce Young, they lost Jahmyr Gibbs, another big part of that offense. It's just something you have to endure if you're an Alabama fan or if you're Nick Saban, because you bring in these talented players and they do their thing, they leave, and you look for the next man up, which typically happens when you win 6 national championships in such a short period of time. On the defensive side, we already know about Will Anderson. Will Anderson went to the NFL as well. He was a high draft pick as well. 38% of the defense is returning. That means you lost so much more defense, but this is still Alabama. They've still done great recruiting. They still have defensive players that they've recruited 5 stars, 4 stars, and players they've made great who are going to try to carry the banner for this Alabama team. It's going to be interesting, but we will sit around and wait. But it doesn't end there. There are other things and other changes that have happened in Alabama while you were asleep, or even if you've been awake. Kevin Steele, defensive coordinator from the Miami Hurricanes, a guy who's familiar with being in the SEC, is now back for his second stint with the Crimson Tide. The former Baylor head coach from years ago is still in the game, and everyone knows what kind of defense he brings to the table, what he expects, what he demands. He's one of Nick Saban's guys. You know that he's going to get the most out of whatever's left behind for this team to make a real run at a national championship, because they're going to have to, because the quarterback situation isn't one of the best. You're bringing in 3 different quarterbacks who were the guys I mentioned earlier, 3 quarterbacks with very limited experience, one from the outside, but let's start from inside out. The guys who Nick Saban decided to recruit and say that these guys have the potential to be some of the best players in the country. Let's talk about Jalen Moreau. He took over last year for an injured Bryce Young. Did it pretty well, nothing special, more of a runner than a passer. He still needs to develop as a passer. Excellent athlete, as many of them are, but he's going to have to bring his game up to speed if he wants to compete and help lead this Alabama Crimson Tide team in the 2023 season. Also, who else do we have? Ty Simpson, a 5-star quarterback, a pocket passing quarterback, someone who can read defenses from left to right, right to left, look ahead, throw the ball, make plays, because that's what they've been doing at Alabama for some time now. We've gotten used to it. And the fans on Alabama, as I've already said before, have gotten used to it. But when this was all said and done, guess what happened during the spring? Everything was supposed to be pretty solid. There were even rumors out there that even Tyler Van Dyke from the Miami Hurricanes was going to go to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, obviously, that did not happen. But what did happen, Tyler Buckner, the other Tyler, came to Alabama. Why? His offensive coordinator from Notre Dame is there as well. Tommy Rees, another piece of the Alabama puzzle that is new for this season. So now you have a new defensive coordinator in Kevin Steele, and now a new offensive coordinator in Tommy Rees from Notre Dame, and he has his charge. Tyler Buckner, who was the MVP of the Gator Bowl, playing against yet another SEC team in the South Carolina Gamecocks, throwing 3 touchdowns, throwing 3 interceptions, but the MVP nonetheless. Maybe he knows this offense well enough and what his offensive coordinator want from him for him to finally get this job at Alabama. That's not one of the people you were looking at initially, but when he had come in and you see the common bond he has with his offensive coordinator, having worked with him before, well, now we see what it's about. Tyler Buchner, MVP of the Gator Bowl, now may be your quarterback in Alabama. Maybe with more talent surrounding him, he may be the guy, but we'll find out when Nick Saban finally makes that decision, because he was summoned at the spring practice, so apparently they were not happy with what was going on in spring practice with their quarterbacks, regardless of who said what afterwards, of how pleased they are, how much they like the progress of the young quarterbacks. You brought in another guy from your offensive coordinator's former team, and you threw him into the mix. And because of familiarity, if nothing else at all, he may get the job. That's still to be decided when the game starts, because in old Nick Saban fashion, Nick Saban's not going to give it up right away. He's going to let you know on game day, maybe somewhere around there, when things are going to be decided in terms of his selected quarterback for this upcoming season. And by the way, don't think that this is going to be the quarterback, whoever it is, because with the triumvirate they have, you just don't know. I'm expecting a bunch of ups and a bunch of downs before they settle on what's good. And they need to do it ASAP, because they will be playing Texas early, but luckily in the confines of Tuscaloosa. So that should be helpful. But at the same time, Nick Saban has been through this before. How do I know? He's won with the likes of Blake Sims in the past. Not a national championship. That would be 2015 when he won with Jake Coker as a quarterback. So he's shown that he doesn't necessarily need a superstar quarterback, but just someone who listens to Nick. But they can also rely on their running game in order to get that run they need, they get that respect they need offensively. And that goes back to the offensive line, where all of this stuff kind of shakes out. Defense wins games, offenses are spectacular, and J.C. Latham, the one who talked about being disrespected, offensive lineman, offensive tackle for the Alabama Crimson Tide, he wants to know, why are they being disrespected like that? I gave you some of the reasons. There are a bunch of quarterbacks who do not know if they will be the starting quarterback. But a team like Alabama, a program historically great like Alabama, Nick Saban continuing to be great as we know him to be, is one of these guys that just goes back in the bag and continues to get the prospects and players that he needs, 5 stars and maybe even greater if that was a possibility. And what did he do for the offensive line help? He goes and gets Caden Proctor, a 6'7", 355-pound offensive lineman out of Iowa. So this isn't just a Southern monopoly. Nick shows that he can go all over the country, including in Big Ten country, and bring back the best of the best, because Proctor is considered the #1 offensive lineman in the country coming out of high school in his senior year. Probably the best offensive lineman coming out since Robert Gallery. But even then, Iowa picked up Robert Gallery. Robert wasn't even an offensive lineman. He was a tight end. I digress. So, Caden Proctor, 6'7", 355 pounds, joining the Alabama Crimson Tide, hoping to anchor the offensive line. So we know that there may not be as many problems there as it seems on the surface, because those young quarterbacks, or even Buchner, who's not so young, can develop behind them, at least understand how playing in the SEC is different than playing at Notre Dame. The talent level is a lot higher. So those are things to look forward to. But we're not going to stop there, because we have to find out who would be some of the biggest nemesis for the Alabama Crimson Tide coming up this season. I'm going to tell you right now, LSU is chomping at the bit to get at Alabama again, even in Tuscaloosa, if nothing else, to prove that it was not a fluke. Their 1-point victory in Baton Rouge was not a fluke against Alabama. We're going to find out right away, because if you ask me, it's not even about quarterback Jaden Daniels. He's getting all of the hype right now. I think by the time that's said and done, or sometime throughout the season, you're going to get a chance to hear about Garrett Nussmeier. Yes, Garrett Nussmeier stood in for a couple of games and played very well. The redshirt sophomore is about to prove a little bit more, because I believe, if you ask me, Jaden Daniels is going to have some of his problems. I'm just putting it out there. So, going back to the beginning of this show, when I asked what to expect from the Alabama Crimson Tide in the 2023 season, I expect wins, a whole lot of wins. I expect for them to go undefeated until they get to the SEC championship game, when they will get a chance to meet none other than the Georgia Bulldogs, who should be undefeated on their end and should be looking forward to a three-peat. And as I mentioned earlier, the first three-peat in college football, major college football that is, since the Minnesota Gophers had done it pre-World War II. And I can't give you any answers there because we got to wait for all of this to shake out. We got to wait for all of this to shake out. We got to see how all of these teams, injury-wise and otherwise, work together to get to that point of the SEC championship game. And then we'll have our winner. And that winner may just be the next national champion. Alabama's familiar with that. Georgia's now familiar with that. But will Michigan allow any of the shenanigans to go? Let me know something. Until next time.